transitions from plasticity to OBJ. There's a lot of factors that are involved in exporting the model correctly to get the look that you want. But once you learn how to set it up and what you're looking for, it's pretty simple. I haven't really seen too many people using it correctly. Not really sure why. Maybe the settings are too complex, but either way, we're going to take a deep dive into it in this video, and we're going to look at all the settings, and we're going to go over how you can export your model and get good results every time. I will tell you that this is going to be a very lengthy video, so just be prepared for that. So here I have a carriage model that was modeled for a maglev train, and it's modeled to full size. This maglev train is the size of a real train, so it's huge. You can see that my grid is set to 1 inch per square, and that just, it's a huge model. So why does this matter? Well, whenever you're dealing with something, the scale of the model makes a huge difference, especially when you're going to export it. So you have to determine, like, what are you doing? Are you making a video game model, or are you making a real world model? What are you doing with it? In this case, almost everything that I do nowadays is geared towards making physical things. So I tend to work in real world scale all the time, and then if I need to scale it down, I do that later. But anyway, you have to keep that in mind. So because we're going to take a look at the large scale model, we'll take a look at something that's smaller scale, and we'll see how the exporter works with each one of those sized models. So we want to export this as an OBJ. We're going to go as a test model. So these are kind of the default settings that come up. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is these checkboxes. You'll notice that we have 3 checkboxes that are not checked. The way that depending on which settings you're using, will depend on which one of these checkboxes is available to you. Personally, I like to have it to where all of them are available, and I like to be able to tweak each one of them individually, because then I feel like you can get the best results. If you're really intimidated by this menu and you're not really sure what to do until you get a better handle on it, you can just work with the ones that it shows. But for right now, we'll take a look at the topology first. So right now, the model is set to tries. And all this means is that every single polygon that it's going to export is going to be a triangle. I don't really see a use for this ever, because even if you were making a game model, which at the end of the day would be a triangulated model, it has all these sliver polygons, the real thin triangles. These are going to create artifacts inside your renderer. They'll have artifacts everywhere. Even if you UV map it and texture it, it's going to look terrible. So I never use the tries export. Now the tries export would be okay if you're just going to 3D print this model and you're not going to be rendering it, then it would be fine. But I still wouldn't use that. The slicers could have some problems. There's just better ways to export it. So now we'll take a look at the quads. And when we go to quads, we can see that it looks a little bit better, but there's still quite a few of these sliver triangles, and I don't like that either. Now, one of the nice things is plasticity was made to emulate and work well with Blender. So because it was set up for that, if you export this model to Blender, Blender can now use n-gons. Well, n-gons are great as far as getting out a clean mesh that you're going to UV map and you're going to texture. So I would switch to n-gons. And when we do that, we can see that our model gets very clean. Now, another nice thing is, in the other video I had talked about, whenever you have a flat surface like this, and then there's something circular or any kind of cutout or anything like that in that face, it has to have connecting edges going to the outside. If it doesn't, you're going to get artifacts. So this is good because we can see that each one of these has connection points. Now, what it doesn't have is connection points where I want them. So we are going to look at that and we're going to tweak that. But right now we're just kind of trying to generally see if things look good, and they do look good for the most part. We could technically export this the way it is and it would be fine. But again, I want to take a deeper dive into it and tweak this out a little bit. So the show wireframe is exactly what it says. If you click that, it just turns the wireframe off. Click it again, it turns it back on. Density, this is going to be used, this is going to actually populate different values down here based on what we have this set to. So like right now, you can see that because we switched to n-gons and it's set to 0.5, a bunch of our checkboxes went away and we only have 3 boxes to work with. Now, if you're just new to this and you're just getting started with it, I would suggest for right now, just use those 3 boxes. You can get really good results just using those, but later on, it's going to get to the point where you want more control and you're going to use more of the boxes. So if we look at now this min width, so this says minimum size of the facet, triangle, n-gon, etc. Increase this value if you have too much detail in smaller objects like tiny fillets. So if we turn this on, we can notice that our model just immediately changed. Well, all of our rounded surfaces are no longer round. It pretty much trashed the model. So what do we do about that? Well, for one thing, we can make this number smaller. So it's 0.1 right now. Now, one of the things that I want to look at is these exporter options are in centimeters. I'm working in inches, so I need to do the conversion from centimeters to inches to know exactly what I'm working with. So in this case, we have 0.1. So if we put in 0.1, we can see that that's just a little bit larger than a 32nd of an inch. So what if I wanted to make this 0.01? Well, now we're down to about 4 thousandths of an inch. So let's try that first. Okay, now you can see that because we dropped that number, now you can see that we have more rounded edges. Now, which number you're going to use, it's going to be up to you because it really depends on the look that you're going for. Every model is going to be different because the size of every model is different. And because these options are directly related to the size of the model, they're always going to be different. Now, there are some go-tos that you can use like n-gons and your density and some other things. You can, go to these and you can set in default values that you've learned work and they'll get you close, but you're still going to have to tweak them no matter what. So another thing that I want to look at now that we've set that for right now is let's go back to this density and let's set this to 1. So if we go back to the density and we set it to 1, you can see that now it's split everything even with more resolution. Now that might be what you want, it might not. It just depends on your particular model. For instance, we have fillets right here and they're not split. They're more like a chamfer right now. Now, if you're just going for a low resolution model that you're going to be doing bakes with from a high res and a low res to create normal maps, that would probably work fine. If you have a chamfer and then there's a fillet on the high res, the fillet will transfer over because of the normal angles to a chamfer. A lot of times I would really like to see that split into 2 faces instead of just 1, but it will work. It just depends on your polygon count that you require, things like that. Now, one thing you will notice, these right here. The reason why this has so many polygons in it is because this surface in CAD was actually a higher degree. So a normal fillet would be like a degree 3. Well, if you get in here, this right here would probably be more like a degree 4. Could possibly be a degree 5. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to you, I am going to make a video later on describing that, because one of the problems of people that come from polygon modeling to CAD is they have no idea what that means to have a degree 3 surface or a degree 4 or degree 5, things like that. You don't have to know what it is, but just understand that the reason why you're getting all these little polygons in here is because this surface is more complex on the CAD model than the other ones around it. So the next thing that we want to do, we have to decide whether or not we want to stay at this density of 1. In this case, I am going to leave it there, and we'll work through and change it later if we need to. So this max width, this maximum size of a facet, triangle, n-gon, etc. This helps avoid excessively long or wide polygons. Now this option right here, let me turn that on. This option I do use quite a bit. So it's set to 1 right now. So let's set it to 0.5. Don't see much change. Let's see, 0.1. Okay. So now you can see that what this is doing is these large faces, it's splitting them up with a grid pattern. Now, I do kind of like this, and the reason why I say that is because we end up with all these connection points around our islands. And as I was telling you before, the more connection points you have around your islands, the better the model is going to look when you bring it into your polygon modeling app. Now, where this could be a problem is if you really have to watch your polygon counts. So you have to set this accordingly. So in this case, we went to 0.5 and it didn't do much. 0.1 put quite a few in there. So let's try 0.25. So as you can see, there's less polygons on there now, but it did split them up pretty good. So what I'm more worried about is these on the end. I want to have these isolated, and the closer each one of your splits are to these circular patterns, the better. So what I might do here, let's take a look at 0.15. Yeah, see, that looks better because now I end up with a square around pretty much each one of those. So because the distance from the island to the edge is smaller, you won't get any artifacts with that. So that actually looks pretty good. Now, some of these other areas are pretty dense. And as I said before, there's not a lot you can do about that other than clean up. I wouldn't really worry too much about a lot of it though. I mean, if you were really going for a low polygon model asset for a video game or something like that, you would use settings that are appropriate for that. In this case, what I'm really after is if I were going to take this into Blender and render it out, I don't want any artifacts. I want things that are round to look round, you know, areas that are smooth to be smooth, areas that are flat to be flat, and so on. And the other thing is if you were exporting this to actually print it, you'd want this a lot denser than what it is right now even. So you'd use a lot smaller values and just crank it up so that when you print it out, you have max detail. Because one of the things you have to watch is if you were going to 3D print this, this is exactly what your holes in the side would look like. Well, if that's not what you're after, then, you know, if you want that to be round, then you're going to have to use smaller settings. There's just no way around it. This is why I said the numbers that are going to be good for you are going to be completely dependent on what you plan on doing with this model. So the next thing that we're going to do, we have the face plane tolerance. So shrinking this value will give you more detail and growing it will give you less. So it says reasonable values are 0.01 for low poly and 0.0001 for high poly. Well, right now it's set to a high poly setting. So let's go 0.01 and see what that gives us. I don't see a lot of change other than the fact that these do look round now. So let's go back to that 0.001 once. Now this will illustrate something else that I have noticed about the exporter on Plasticity. You notice that these were faceted pretty bad before, and when I changed the number, it made these round. So that's kind of like an update issue that I've noticed happens sometimes. So sometimes what you have to do is you have to click on something else like quads to kind of force a refresh and then go back. See, now you can see what we have there. So that's kind of important to keep that in mind. Let's go 0, 1. Now what I want to show here is we went 0.01. And if you look here, it says values from 0.35 are low poly, 0.15 are high. Now, this number, I took it way lower than even what it recommends that you do, and there was no change. So notice that you do want to kind of pay attention to whatever it gives you here, because if you start going crazy low on these numbers, you're going to get very little benefit from it in the model, but it's going to change the computation time of things. So in this case, I'm just going to set this to 0.15, which would be what it considers to be the high polygon. So let's take a look at the edge angle. So the maximum allowable angular deviation in radians of edges. So what we want to do here is that's where we're going to get into this kind of stuff. So let's go here and let's go 0. Let's see. Yeah, we'll use 0.15. So a few things changed up here. I saw it. And that's another thing. You got to kind of go around your model and take a look at things. Put this to 0.35. So you can see that some things change and sometimes it makes minor changes. So we'll set this to the high poly and move on. So our curve max length. So this is the maximum allowable length of a segment of a curved edge. So it doesn't give you a value in here, but this is where we can use the calculator to figure out what we want to use. So if we look here, right now, 0.106, that's 41 thousandths. Now, because I know that these openings right here are 1-inch holes, this really isn't, it's not good enough. So I'm thinking something more like 0.01. So let's try that. Okay, now it split everything way farther than what I want it to be. Now, although we do want splits on the faces, we do not want this many. So let's change that number. Back to our export. I've seen it do that before too. So let's go here. Let's go 0.15. Let's go 0.05. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So because we have all of these connection points going to the islands and everything else, that's gonna be good. So the next one's gonna be this plane angle. So let's go in here, let's set that to 1 for starters. Not much change. Let's check out 0.5. Let's do 0.1. 0.01. Okay, now you started to see how these split. So let's go back to 0.1. You can see how it changed. Now, those splits that it just gave me, you may not want. Let's go 0.001. See, all this is doing by making this number smaller is introducing more garbage into our model that we would have to clean up. And then you can see here that it got a lot cleaner. So let's go ahead and export this and take a look at it in Blender real quick. We'll be right back. So here we are in Blender with our model opened up. And I want to point out that if you look, we don't have any artifacts. Everything looks really clean. There's no weird shading. The only thing that I see that I might want to tighten up is to make these a little bit rounder. But you can see that if you were exporting this for a game or anything like that, or even for rendering for that matter, this would be perfectly fine. As I said, there's no artifacts. We were able to get everything to where it was really nice and clean. And that's really what you're after. So let's go back into Plasticity. Now, remember what I said about this min width. So as I was looking at the model in Blender, I didn't like how these weren't round. In this case, I really want them to be more circular. So the min width is what we want to set here. So let's go 0.001 and see what that gives us. Okay, so now what you can see is we definitely have more definition around each one of these circles. So that's really good. What I don't care for is that on each one of these fillets, it really subdivided them a lot. So let's see if we can find a happy medium. 0.005. Let's try that. Now, at some point, there's going to be a trade-off. If you make your fillets with too few of segments, then your circles are also going to have too few of segments. So you have to find that balance in between the two. And where is it that it's giving you the results that you're after? So in this case, I would say that the 0.005 is giving me the numbers that I want. Now, you'll notice that I did not turn on the face plane tolerance and I didn't turn on the edge plane tolerance. And what I wanted to show real quick was just how if you use the ones that it gives you, you can get good results. We are going to take a look at them next, but I just wanted to point that out. So our face plane tolerance is the maximum allowable deviation in centimeters. Shrinking this value will give you more detail and growing it will give you less. So let's take a look at that, if it will let me turn it on. Okay, so with our current settings, it won't let me turn that on, which is okay because, again, I want the settings that I have. So we can't use the edge plane tolerance either. Basically, what it's saying is that we have control over these two things with other options, and that's why they're blanked out. So they work the same way, though. And the way that you should be working through figuring out exactly what you need is exactly the same as all this. So let's go ahead and let's export this. And we'll take a look at this one in Blender real quick, and then we'll take a look at a smaller model real fast. Okay, so here we are back in Blender with the updated model. And you can see that these are nice and circular now. There's no artifacts anywhere. Everything looks really good. Even if we go to the back and we look here, we have nice sharp edges where they're supposed to be. We have nice rounded edges everywhere that that's supposed to be. And I feel like this is one of the best ways to work on exporting your models and checking them. It'll take you a little bit of time to get used to the settings, but just change your numbers in small increments and you'll be able to get the results that you're after. So now what we want to do is take a look at a smaller object and exporting it. We'll be right back. So here you can see that we have a much smaller object just based on our grid being inches. So let's go up here and let's go to export. Call this test 2. And it is using the exact same settings that we had before. But as you can see, this is not the way that I would export it. So again, we're going to use the same process. N-gons, let's take a look. Quads are no good. Triangles obviously are no good. So we're going to go back to the N-gons. Let's go to 0.5 just to check and see. That helped out quite a bit. And to be honest, I think we might even, let's see, let's go 0.3. I feel like that would be a good starting point. So as you see here, I would start with the density. But you notice now that our settings, we actually have everything unlocked now because of the density setting that we're using. So another thing that I would do here is I would just start working my way down. And I would start with 0.1, and then as you can see, it gives you an error and it goes away. So that means you can't use 0.1. Let's go 0, 1. Okay, so now this is giving us a pretty decent result. And again, because this surface is so complex, that's why it's being broken up the way that it is. Now, what I don't like is this stuff right here. That's pretty terrible. So we'll see if we can't fix that. So let's go here. So you notice that kind of cleaned that up a little bit. Let's try 1. That did an even better job. Maybe 1.5. So let's see. Let's go. We're looking for low poly on this, 0.01. Let's go to our next one. So our low poly would be 3.5, which we're pretty much at right now. Let's go here. Let's go 0.01. Saw a slight change, not much. Now, when I set that to 0.001, it kind of filled in this fillet a little bit. I still don't like the way that fillet looks. It might give us a problem. We'll have to take a look. So let's see if we can increase this a little bit. Yeah, that helped out quite a bit. That pulled that area back right along that edge. So that'll definitely smooth that out pretty nice. And let's go 0.15 here. Yeah, that's way too much. I don't need it split that much. So let's see. Our max length on the curves. That didn't really do a whole lot. Let's take a look at it here. Yeah, I'm going to leave that number higher because I don't want that split up over there. Not too worried about the way this geometry looks. I mean, we're not going to be putting a subdivision surface modifier on it or anything like that. We're just looking how to get these out where they're clean without artifacts inside a Blender. So I'm more worried about this area right in here having artifacts. Go to 1, that doesn't do much. 0.1. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot here. And that just added more detail that I didn't need to be added. Let's see. Well, let's take it out to Blender and let's check it for artifacts. That's one of the things that you should always be doing anyway. So we'll be right back inside of Blender. Now, for the most part, this looks good, but I can see a couple of minor artifacts. Right here's one of them, and here's another one over here. So we're going to jump back into Plasticity. So here we are back in Plasticity, and we're going to change this density setting to 0.4. So that's going to increase that a little bit. And then the next thing we're going to do is look at this curve max length. We're going to set that to 0.4 also, because that's going to split this up a little bit more right there. And I believe it also should get rid of some of our artifacts that are coming from over in here. Now, one of the things I will say is that this model looks like it has an artifact there, so we're not going to be able to get rid of that. If it has an artifact in CAD, it'll definitely have an artifact inside of Blender. So let's go ahead and start with that. We're going to export it. We'll go back into Blender. Here we are back in Blender, and you can see that that artifact is gone now. So that's it for this video. If it helped you, please hit the like and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video.